Hello, everyone. I'm R. Blank, and welcome back to the Season 1 finale of the Healthier Tech Podcast, the podcast about a healthier approach to living alongside modern technology. Before we begin, a brief word. This podcast is brought to you by my company, Shield Your Body, where it is our mission to help make technology safer for you and your loved ones to enjoy. Inspired by the life's work of my father, Dr. Martin Blank, one of the world's leading EMF scientists, I founded Shield Your Body in 2012, and we provide a ton of great and free resources for you to learn all about EMF radiation, like articles, ebooks, webinars, videos, and this podcast. And we also have a world-class catalog of laboratory-tested EMF and 5G protection products. From our phone pouch and laptop pad, all the way up to our bed canopy, all of our shielding products are laboratory-tested and include a lifetime warranty. Learn more about our products, why we have hundreds of thousands of satisfied customers around the world at shieldyourbody.com. That's shieldyourbody, all one word, .com. And use promo code POD to save 15% on your first order with free shipping throughout North America and Europe. And today we're going to take a look at some of what we learned this season. And to help us do that, we're bringing in our producer, James, from London. Hi, James.
Hello. Thank you for letting me be on your podcast.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much for being willing to participate.
No, my pleasure. I've enjoyed this season immensely. I have been a mixture of terrified by the content and educated by it in equal measure, but I'm sure we'll touch on that in this episode. But yeah, it's been fascinating to listen. I always say that I'm sort of like, it's the idiot's guide, and Stephanie's always very polite and says, no, you're just new to it. I'm like, okay, you're polite. But no, it's really, I'm going to be interested to share what my insights have been, to get your take on it as the experts in the field.
Yeah, no, and I'm really glad that you're joining us because, you know, Stephanie and I are in the trenches kind of every day on these issues. And so we really appreciate having someone with more of an outsider perspective to come in and sort of share, you know, what you got out of the season.
Yeah. And also, like, you know, if you don't mind sharing, or wherever you feel comfortable, sharing how it may have, you know, this new knowledge may have affected how you approach your relationship with tech.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it really has. And I'm not paying the podcast lip service by saying that in any way, shape, or form. You know, some of the episodes that we've recorded have made me really, really look at the behavior of myself and my family and how we operate in our house. And there's definitely been some shifts have been made for sure. So I'm looking forward to sharing that on this episode.
Thank you. That's actually probably one of the best compliments you could have given, because that's the goal. That's the goal of the
Absolutely.
Healthier Tech Podcast, is to help people learn the controls that they have and the impacts of the decisions that they make in their relationships with technology. So let's step back to our first interview. It was with Adam Cox, the hypnotherapist who was talking about technology addiction and ways to stop it. Do you remember that interview, James?
Yeah, I do. I remember that really well because I actually know Adam quite well, and I've read some of his work previously. I've listened to a lot of his podcasts. I helped him to launch some of his podcasts actually, and you know, as a hypnotherapist, he's very, very well respected here in the United Kingdom. What I found most interesting about that was how, because obviously we're talking, or when we started out the sort of the remit of this podcast, I thought we were going to be talking about like the hardware of tech, if that makes sense, but actually the psychological way that technology is used, almost, I hate to say it, but used against us to keep these devices in our hand was really, really interesting. Because, you know, it's the issue with technology and EMF in general is only relevant if these things are near our bodies, and the way to keep them near our bodies is by addicting us to what's on the screen. So yeah, I thought it was a really interesting insight from Adam.
Yeah, that's a great point. These devices, these experiences, really, they're engineered for addiction, because that's what keeps us coming back and using them. And obviously, you know, we come at it from a perspective of what that means in terms of EMF exposure. But I think Adam really illuminated, you know, what that means just in terms of overall quality of life, how this can impact so many aspects of your life, and that these devices are engineered to be addictive. It's kind of crazy when you put it in those terms.
Yeah, you know what I thought was interesting is how I look at, you know, things like Netflix even now, where, you know, there was part of the discussion, you know, talking about how Netflix now took away the end credits because it takes you out of the flow. It distracts you from the pattern of watching continually. And, you know, I understand why they do it. I get the business goals, but there is a cost to that. And I hadn't really, really thought about it at that level until that interview.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that I think, I can't remember which episode it was mentioned in, but, Netflix's number one competition, I think R set you up with, sort of tripped you up intentionally in one of the intros or one of the outros to the show, said, who's Netflix's number one competition back in the day? And you said, Blockbuster. And I was sat there as well, going, I know this one, I read the books. And then he went, number one competition, sleep. And I think that actually shows you the psychology with which these platforms are going into it. And it's almost this beautifully, I hate to say it again, beautifully like evil symbiotic relationship between tech companies who are making the hardware and the people who are making the stuff that keeps us on these devices. Because, the more eyeballs and the more time that people can get you on stuff, the better. It's a weird one, isn't it, with things like Netflix? Because realistically, you'd think that there isn't actually there isn't really a sort of a monetization model to them keeping you stuck in your chair, because they're not running adverts, you're already paying for the service,
right?
So why would they want you to? Why would they sort of like reverse engineer it and give you the whole season of Bridgerton or whatever that one's called, or This Is Us? Oh my God, how good is This Is Us? That's the subject for another podcast. But why would they want me to go through it all in one go? You would think they want you to sort of eke it out as the content, but they don't. They just want you to be, I guess what they're really trying to do is make their platform part of your habitual behavior, and they have changed habitual behaviors with things like dumping a whole season or a whole series in one go. So yeah, really interesting. And the thing that I found most insightful with Adam's episode was when he was saying, for it to be an addiction, it just means that you don't want to stop or you can't stop. And how many times have you got to midnight and gone, do you know what, I've got an early start tomorrow, I need to go to bed, just one more episode? That is like, we sort of laughed about it at the time, like, I'm going to regret this in the morning. But that's a mild addiction. Like, that is an addictive issue. So yes, it's for me, he sort of framed it in a way, and this has been the sort of highlight of the season for me, is that it made you think about it without trying to scare you into changing your behavior. It just made you think in a different way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I it's so irresponsible to make sleep the enemy. Like, it just, that we need that. Like, I would feel like it's in their best interest if we live long lives, and sleep is how we regenerate. It just seems criminal.
And James, you're reminding me. Last night, I knew I had to wake up early today for this recording, and I just finished episode 7 of Jupiter's Legacy. So there's only one more left. I was like, no, I'm not going to watch it. I'm going to bed so I can wake up refreshed for this interview. And the way you just explained it made me feel like I just had a little victory over Netflix.
But the other thing that I thought was really interesting with Adam's show was, the fact he was talking about how COVID exacerbated people's addiction, because it was almost like Netflix and those kind of streaming services became like our best friends, didn't it? In the absence of actual people, we kind of had this weird, I think we've got an even deeper relationship with certain platforms. And I love Netflix. I think it's great. I listen to the Founders podcast. I've bought his books. I buy his stuff. I pay him 10 quid a month for Netflix. I wouldn't say that I'm addicted, but I don't know if I could live without it now. So maybe that is an addiction. I think my children also have an addiction to Coco Melon. If you're a parent, you probably know that one on Netflix. My God, that stuff's crazy. But yeah, they have definitely, if the intent of these platforms is to change consumer behavior, then how they utilize content has definitely ticked that box for sure.
Yeah, like you, I actually, and I think this came across in the episode, trying to remember, but when he started talking about Netflix in the context of tech addiction, I sort of didn't really want to accept it. Because I think of tech addiction, I think of all those people who are addicted to, Facebook or Instagram.
I was thinking gamers. I was thinking of those kids on Xbox. I was like, yeah, wouldn't want to be a parent to one of them.
Yeah. Meanwhile, we're flipping on Netflix. What did they just release right now? Can I binge it the whole? In fact, the term binge watching, I think, came from Netflix. That wasn't a concept until Netflix was streaming content.
No, that whole methodology of content sort of absorption was literally created via Netflix, and they've done. There's a lot of, the people talk about, Facebook's evil algorithm and Instagram's evil algorithm, but actually, the stuff, the data points that Netflix have got on you in terms of what they show you next. To Stephanie's point a minute ago, you never see the full credits anymore. They're showing you the next thing that you're going to like. You've sat there and watched the end of an episode of something, and then coming up next or suggested for you, like, oh, I think I would like that. Well, yeah, because they've got 17,000 data points on you. It's not an accident. It's by design that you've seen that.
And further to that point, I mean, they literally, they call it binge watching. Like, in what context is binging considered to be something you're encouraged to do? Like, no one ever says, oh, I binged on vitamin C and I binged on salad and I binged on exercising. No, they talk about binging on ice cream and, binging on alcohol, and, those are bad things. And now it's binging on Netflix, and it's like, oh yeah, everyone does it.
Yeah, it's almost like a bit of a badge of honor, isn't it? Oh, did you see that season? Yeah, I binge watched the whole thing in 2 nights. It's almost like a weird, like I say, no one's going to go, oh yeah, do you know what? I just absolutely binged 17 cucumbers. I feel so great. I binged 14, oranges. My vitamin C's through the roof. It's always this. Yeah, it's a very, when you think about it, it's a very strange badge of honor, isn't it? Like, I'm obsessed with my TV. I can't leave it. Well, great. Well done you, mate.
Right. But also there's another point here, and it's how Facebook and social media perpetuates the binging mentality, because what happens if you miss an episode of something when it airs? The next day you have to avoid Facebook because somebody's going to spoil it for you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the same with sports, isn't it? That addictive mentality is very... Yeah, it's like I say, it's like this symbiotic hardware, software, social platform, content production platform. They're because you can't. And again, this goes back to sort of the data point, which is probably the subject for season 2 potentially. But the data points, they know how much of an episode that you've watched of something. They know if you're on your phone at the same time. They can serve you up these adverts. So like I say, the whole thing is about trying to up the level of consumption to such a high level for. And you can't escape it unless you literally put your phone on airplane mode and, or your computer, or, run out into nature and just sit in the woods.
What's interesting too, though, is when you turn your phone off, what do? Oftentimes it's go watch TV. It's go consume another piece of technology,
an experience on a different device.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so that was I really like that recap, and it did force me to come to confront myself on some of my Netflix, my relationship with Netflix.
You and me both.
So then we got into the next interview with Stephen Collette from the Building Biology Institute. And James, am I correct? You hadn't actually heard of the Building Biology Institute until we started planning that episode. Is that right?
No, I didn't even know building biology was a thing. When you guys sent through the list of suggested sort of topics and subjects, and I was like, I think there's a typo here. They've put building biology. What are these guys on? Then I looked into it. Oh my God. There's so much stuff that is related to the way that we live. And again, a testament to the guests that you guys pulled together for this season, because Stephen was yet another person who beautifully illustrated the challenges that we have, but also wasn't here to like fearmonger people. But I've got to say, at the end of it, I now fear my carpet. I've got the thickest pile carpet you've ever seen in your entire life. And it's always been like a luxury, because whenever my friends come over, they come upstairs and they're like, oh my God, your carpet is so soft. It's like half an inch thick. And I'm like, yeah, luxurious carpet. We are fancy in this house. And now I'm like, don't step on it. It's going to kill you.
It's so soft because of all of those microparticles.
I said this to my wife literally on Sunday. Every time I now like hoover the carpet, vacuum the carpet, I relive that episode. And my wife's like, why are you taking so long? I'm like, literally, I should spend 20 minutes per square foot. So unless you want us to have loads of bugs, you'll allow me to do it in stripes over a very long period of time.
I'm impressed at the fact that you've been able to prevent yourself from actually just going home and ripping it all out. So
it's the rental. My landlord would kill me. Otherwise I would absolutely do it. I try and live downstairs now where there's wooden flooring and tiles. But other than that, I don't really even want to go upstairs to the bedroom anymore. My wife's like, should we go to bed? I'm like, nope, you can go. I'm lying on the floor. I'm not stupid.
I'm going to binge Netflix.
On the wooden floor. I'm giving with one hand and I'm taking away with another.
I'm guessing that you don't have pets because I used to like carpeting too, and then I started having pets. And when you have pets, carpeting is just like the worst because everything they shed just ends up embedded in the carpeting. So I've tried to live without carpeting now for about 20 years, but it wasn't because of building biology. It was just because of pets.
Yeah, I had no idea that this would be classed as building biology, but it's even things like, and again, one of the I know one of your sort of idea, sort of actionable steps you wanted people to take away was something actionable from the podcast, but not fear mongering. And it really like the level of dust in the house and all that kind of stuff is really, really made me think about it differently. Sort of like leaving my phone outside the bedroom. There's definitely some tactical stuff that I now don't do based on this podcast for sure. Even things like the master bedroom in our house is above where all the Wi-Fi devices are and stuff. We've got Philips Hue lighting, so we've got Wi-Fi lights. I mean, it's our house. Our house is a nightmare. We should be running around with shield your body blankets on us all the time and just turning it into tents in the living room like you used to do when you were a kid. But it's really like we're looking at now at changing all the bulbs out to normal bulbs. We're looking at turning all the devices off at night. So it's really and this is what's great about it, because a lot of the stuff that I read in preparation of working with you guys, a lot of the advice was, like basically move out to the countryside and live in a yurt. And I was like, well, that's not entirely feasible. But actually, all of the guests for this season have gone, you can't get away from it, but just try and do your best with it. And I've loved that message.
Yeah, every little thing helps.
Yeah.
Every little thing helps. And I think going back to the carpets, even when Steve was discussing that, there's that fear point, but he was also laying out really simple things to do, like open your windows while you vacuum more often, and if you can, invest in a like HEPA vacuum. So he was, it was kind of scary, but also he just was like, hey, and here's some things you can do.
Yeah, the other thing that I loved about Stephen is that he had come from it from a place that he was like not interested in it in any way, shape or form until his baby got poorly. And so he came at this from a really good intentioned place, if that makes sense, because he needed to help his family. And the overall feeling that I got from him was that he just wanted to try to help more other families. And this, the first step towards sort of making a change in anything like this is just having even a 1% increase in your awareness that there's maybe something you can do about it. So that was great. And how I really got an insight on that episode of like how buildings actually work and how what's going on inside your home, because it's a very British saying, you guys might not know, but a man's home is his castle, and that's a very like British thing to say, but actually the very building that is supposed to protect your family might inadvertently be doing you quite a bit of harm if you don't understand what's going on within it. So
right. And Steve, I love this quote so much. Our buildings are our third skin, and that's so true. Technically we're an indoor species at this point. And what we do with our homes is extremely important. It's just as important as what we do with our skin.
Yeah. And further to your point, James, I think one of the things that Stephen covered really well is, you don't have to fix everything. You don't have to achieve perfection. This is a process. In fact, there is no real perfection because everything comes with trade-offs and a cost. You'll get a benefit, but there's also a cost. But it's a process, and you identify things, and then you do what you can about them, and then you repeat as you have capacity to do. But don't stress about. Don't be terrified that you're not living in a perfect environment. I at least felt that Stephen did a really good job communicating that part of it.
Yeah. And I think he at one point he said, if the place is filthy, it will cause you physical and emotional stress. And I was
totally.
I was like, that's so right. Because obviously you think about like, oh, actually physically this can't be good. But the emotional stress of that kind of stuff is kind of just that niggle that just like chips away at you sort of thing, which I thought was a great insight. But like I say, it's I'd never, as you mentioned at the beginning, I'd never even heard the term building biology, but now I actually really sort of consider how we need to exist in these boxes effectively that we've decided that we're all going to live in.
Yeah. No, totally.
Absolutely.
It was a great interview.
Fishbowl.
Yeah, it was a really great interview. And then we went from that to another building biologist, Kathy Cook, who was talking with us about building resilience with nutrition. And, James, Stephanie and I both know Kathy pretty well. We've been working with her for a while now, but this, I'm pretty sure, was your first exposure to Kathy and her message. How did it strike you?
Yeah, it definitely was the first engagement that I've had with her. Again, in preparation for doing this podcast, I've done a bit of Googling of a few people that were going to be involved, just to try and have like some sort of semblance of being able to hold a conversation with people. But it was really, really interesting, and I love the fact that she's so willing to address those controversial subjects of electromagnetic hypersensitivity and really break down what the symptoms were and how to cope with it, and also how to help somebody who does suffer with it, if that makes sense, because that was a big point that I took from it. It wasn't just like, this is what it is and this is why it's bad. It was like, here's how you can actually help someone. So there's almost like a tactical and a practical element to it, which I thought was great.
Yeah, Stephanie, I know you and I have talked about this. Just the part of the episode where Kathy and I were talking about what it's like, just trying to understand what it's like to live life this way. I know that hit home pretty strongly for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Trying to be, a more empathetic human, listening to her story and how much this sensitivity affected her was eye-opening. And it really built my compassion muscle for people that, we deal with people who are coming to us out of desperation all the time. And they're experiencing serious health effects, and they're, some of them are in pain constantly. And like I said, it really, listening to her really, really helped work that compassion muscle and try to understand how hard this and challenging it must be for somebody who is, who's dealing with this. And we're in a world where there's just so much EMF. What do? That desperation.
Yeah, because there's a bit of a stigma, isn't it? And that was, again, one of the things I took away from it. You wouldn't, if you saw somebody walking down the road with a broken leg, you wouldn't go, "Ha, you got a broken leg," because you can tangibly see it. It almost makes it more real. But the suffering of someone who has issues with EHS are no less significant than somebody with a broken leg. You just can't see it. And, I think the message that I took away from the episode was that we need to spread awareness regarding it as a health problem, because there is that stigma attached to it. So you've got people who are suffering twice almost. They've actually got the issue that they're suffering through the EHS. And then you've also got the kind of the suffering that they're getting from the ignorance of other people who are like, oh, well, you've got a bit of a headache or whatever, whatever the take on it is. And I think that's definitely these days. I'm not sure what it's like where you guys are, because I know obviously you're spread globally because you're international jet setters. But definitely in the United Kingdom, the mental health aspect of our overall health and well-being is being taken a lot more seriously. So fingers crossed as that becomes more mainstream, because 5 years ago, you wouldn't have talked about your mental health in the workplace, but now that's a very, very everyday occurrence. So hopefully EHS will be, by talking about it and by raising awareness, we'll get to that level of clarity with it, and we'll have those kind of open conversations around it the same way that we are about mental health these days. Because I think it's, like you say, it's no less detrimental to your health than breaking a bone. Just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not there.
Right, absolutely. And I think it's really important to just, remember to believe people. Maybe you don't understand EMF, maybe you don't understand maybe you doubt, what's affecting or causing the discomfort, but we just have to believe people, because the fact is the person experiencing it is real to them. Yeah. It is 100% real.
And so, that's what I was going to say about James's example about the broken leg, and someone's walking down the street with a broken leg and you say, "Hi, you have a broken leg." It's actually worse than that. It's, "Hi, you think you have a broken leg. Wake up."
Yeah.
And going through life experiencing that kind of pain, where not only is there no relief, but people don't even believe you, it's a tragedy. And it's really hard to live that way.
Kathy did share some experiences she's had going into homes where the client is experiencing this discomfort and their spouse doesn't believe them.
Yeah.
And that's like the most heartbreaking thing that, that really touched me is, how difficult that must be to live in an environment where you're in pain and then the person that you're with who should be supporting you is gaslighting you and just doesn't believe what's happening.
Yeah.
Yeah, you must feel on some level like you're going mad, and especially when it's the person who you're living with and you love, and you need their support more than anything. It's sort of, again, it goes back to like the mental health thing over here in the UK. Everyone's talking about depression and mental well-being. It just wasn't the conversation a couple of years ago, but it's becoming much more mainstream. And again, I have to say actually on this point, because I'm using this, you might be able to hear, hopefully, because my golden caramel sounding voice. We've got a fancy studio that we use, and I've been getting headaches a lot when I've been in the studio, and I've been in, like this week, for example, I'm entering my 47th hour sat in the studio this week, which is over the top, and maybe I'm just a bit sleep deprived, but that's a subject for another podcast probably. But I'm sat, I've got three, I'm looking around the studio now, I've got 3 gigantic sort of professional lighting rig lights set up. I've got 2 monitors in front of me. I've got 3 computers around me. I've got a mixing desk. I've got 4 black 4K Blackmagic cameras. And every day I've been leaving with I feel really drained, and I'm sort of going, actually, is there more to this? Do I need, is it because of all of because it also is everything's soundproof, so nothing can escape from this room. So I'm wondering, am I in this swirl of sort of EMF and EHS sort of frequencies that I'm sort of just sat in the midst of? So
yeah, no, and I think that's a great segue to the next interview that we did with Lloyd Burrell, which was also focused on electrosensitivity. And one thing that I think I brought up in that interview was my belief that more people have sensitivity to EMF than realize they have it, because they're going to experience symptoms and they're going to chalk it up to something else, like I just need more sleep, I'm working too hard, I just need an energy drink, or I should eat more salad, and not realizing that it's sitting around all of this tech and being exposed to these forces that is contributing to what they are sensing.
Yeah, and in that interview too, which is interesting, is that all of those things you just said can also be true.
Yeah.
So Lloyd described his journey as a long journey that took a holistic approach, because tired is also a thing, not, being overworked and stressed. Those are all contributing factors as well. And EMF is another, sensitivity is another thing that's part of this health spectrum.
The other thing with Lloyd was he was talking about all this stuff. He said, obviously, though, I live in the real world. I've got a blog and a mailing list of a couple of 100,000 people who need to hear from me every single week. So I haven't just gone and lived out in the countryside in the middle of nowhere in a year. Like, I have to be using my devices. I just use them intentionally and as safely as possible. Things like simple stuff like I think he mentioned using an Ethernet cable rather than using Wi-Fi. And using, I think he might have mentioned a landline phone, or using his, having a really basic mobile phone, so you haven't got all of the other sort of techie bits included within it. So I think that's the kind of stuff, and this is what hopefully the main point of this, or one of the powers of this podcast season, especially for me, because I know obviously you guys are like in the thick of it, because this is your main thing day in, day out. But just for me, it definitely makes me think about what actually is EMF and how does it emit it? Because we've all heard like don't put your phone in your pocket. No one really knows why, but we've just sort of heard that conventional wisdom. So like, okay, sure, but you're thinking, but I'll stand, but I'll sit with my laptop on my lap all afternoon. That's absolutely fine. Well, obviously it's not. I'll be. I remember my dad actually. He when he was still alive, my mum was convinced of this, by the way, and we all thought that she was crackers at the time, but maybe ironically she wasn't. My dad had a bit of the server for his company was in his office, and whenever you'd walk in there, it was always roasting hot. It was always boiling. And they had this, this server for like 30, 40 accountants or whatever it was. So actually, knowing what I know now after this conversation, I wonder how much damage that actually was doing to him, because as I say, when you used to walk into his office, regardless whether it was summer or winter, there was always this weird, horrible heat in there. And he's literally sat next to like a transmitter of EMF for, 9 hours a day for 15 years, which I can't imagine did him any good, frankly.
A lot of people have these exposures that until they know to think about it, they don't think about it. And
yeah, absolutely. I have pictures of my grandfather up on the telephone poles. He was part of the effort to fix and streamline electric poles in Vermont in the 40 I think in the 50s. And I wonder how that must have affected his health and his early passing.
When Dad and I were writing Overpowered, I don't remember if this made it into the book, but my mother brought up this example, because my parents, they were born in the 30s, and I gather when they were growing up, they had little novelty X-ray machines at like the 5 and dime, where they encouraged you to, isn't it cool? You can look at the bones in your foot. So put your foot in the X-ray machine so you can look at your foot. And it sounds unbelievable now, but that's what they used to do. And it's sort of like I feel like in the future we're going to look back on this era and say, I can't believe the way we were using technology.
Yeah. And it starts with this, though, doesn't it? It starts with a podcast like this, and it starts with conversations like this, and it starts with guests like Lloyd, who can break it down, get rid of the woo-woo and the conspiracy theories and go, no, actually, here's the science behind it. Every single thing that creates electricity does create an EMF, whether you want to believe it or not. This is not about 5G towers and all this kind of stuff, because that's unfortunately, again, and maybe this is the wrong take on it, but from the lay person or the person who's outside of this conversation, the sort of the EMF world is really kind of vilified by those who are there to grab attention for their own gain, frankly, the fear-mongering conspiracy theorists. And I think, unfortunately, that's where, the likes of the rest of the industry who are actually just talking great practical sense, Lloyd's book, EMF's Practical Guide, it's not there to scaremonger. It's like, here's some facts based on science, read it or don't. But this is literally what's happening. Electromagnetic fields are real. They're coming from your cell phone and your devices, and everything else that's got electricity in it is giving off an EMF, whether you like to believe it or not. It's just science. But I think it starts with these conversations had by like you guys are doing this podcast, and just sensible people who can put a rational point across in a way that's specifically designed not just to scare everybody into, running to the hills.
Yeah. And one thing that this podcast and many other people who are involved in this industry, one thing we have to overcome is this tech addiction, which has come up multiple times in the season, and which wireless industry lobbyists and skeptics, they kind of abuse that. They take advantage of people who are addicted to this stuff don't even want to hear that it's dangerous. And I think in that next episode where we had Gary Brecka, and he talked about much more than tech addiction, but in particular, his approach to helping to break tech addiction was really mind-opening for me.
Yeah, Gary is someone that I've known for a few years now, and he's a really, really insightful guy. And he's got this beautiful ability, unless you let him go down the rabbit hole, in which case hold on to the seat, because he's just going to drag you along for the ride. But one of the things that I most love about him is that he's got the ability, when he chooses to do so, to take really complex concepts and make them simple. So I remember he was sort of talking to me about methylation pathways and how the blood actually utilizes oxygen and the power of oxygenation and all that kind of stuff. And I actually flew to Miami a few years ago to interview him for a podcast. And he sat down in the lobby of his fantastic sort of clinic, and he was explaining all this stuff to me. I was like, oh, this is brilliant, because I can actually understand it. But again, one of the things that came out for me was, just do the basics. There's so many like simple, basic things that we can do for the betterment of our health in general. But, and I think Gary sort of highlighted it beautifully. Mm-hmm. Things that, you mentioned it, I think in the intro to that episode, Stephanie, about the Wim Hof breathing, that as simple as that, breathing in and breathing out for 30 sort of rounds of that sounds overly simple, but sort of the Eastern world and the sort of the world that have been more in sort of meditation and a bit more of a spiritual understanding of us as beings rather than, us in the Western world traditionally. I think those basics is what we need to go back to. And it's great that people like Gary and Wim Hof are kind of popularizing that kind of stuff, because in a world where we're using more devices for more amount of time, we're plugged in, literally we're plugged into more stuff for so much of our waking hours, even just taking the time to get outside and do the breath work and do what he said about, the saunas and then the cold ice bath therapies and all that kind of stuff. Fingers crossed, in a world where, exactly as you mentioned, we don't actually we're willing addicts. We don't want to hear that our phone's killing us. We don't want to hear that Netflix is bad. We don't want to hear that sitting on a computer for 10 hours a day isn't good for us, because it doesn't serve how we've designed our lives in the majority of cases. Fingers crossed that even if we are doing all that bad stuff, we can be a bit more mindful with a podcast like this, and then maybe take some of those basic tactical steps from Gary. And it doesn't have to be rocket science or complicated. We can do the basics to help ourselves. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, and what you're saying, it's like, well, mindful. So we, obviously being more mindful about our tech, but like the basics. What is more basic than breathing? What is more basic than that? So taking the time and allowing ourselves to take the time to make that important and to focus on it, because in a world of tech, our attention is pulled in 100 different directions. And, if we can just step back a little bit and do just focus on breathing, what a big impact that can have on our health, because it just doesn't get any more basic than that.
Yeah. And I think that's also really valuable for people who are interested in EMF and health and living healthier by reducing their exposure to EMF. We talk all the time about the ways that you can reduce your exposure, but Gary was just, another person in this season who illuminated another approach, right? Because yes, reducing your exposure is part of it, but also addressing other areas of your physiology and your health can also improve your resilience and it's like a balance. It's like a seesaw, right? You want to reduce your exposure, but you also want to improve your health. And Gary, I thought was really fantastic at illuminating that sort of that other side of the equation.
Yeah, and Kathy touched on that really well in her episodes as well, didn't she? The sort of the basics of getting the nutrition right and trying to make sure you're intaking as much of the good stuff as you can. I'm grateful that in the United Kingdom we haven't got everything right, but definitely the food supply seems to be a little bit better than I know a lot. I imagine a lot of the listeners for this podcast will come from the United States, and the food there seems to be a real bone of contention. So, if you took away the two lessons from this, eat more of the stuff suggested by Kathy and then do some breathing as suggested by Gary, then you're on your way to being a little bit healthier, if nothing else. And I've got to say that I've implemented the Wim Hof breathing on a day-to-day basis off the back of that podcast, and it's having a real impact. It's really, really good.
I hope you're not doing that deep breathing when you're standing over your carpet, James.
I've got my head out the window. I've got no devices. I'm like,
well, so and this brings us to the final interview we had this season. And after listening to everything that we were just talking about and everything that came up in the interviews this season, you might be wondering, and it's a totally reasonable question to ask, how is this stuff even legal? That's what we had Dr. Devra Davis on to help address. What did you think of that interview, James?
I was absolutely staggeringly stunned at the idiocy with which decisions are made. And I know that the world is, largely run by economics. I'm not naive to that fact, but the pure and simple, the fact that she shared that the radiation, I think it was Dr. Devra who shared that the radiation test that they utilized for mobile phones was done 25 years ago. And the radiation legitimacy stats were based on a 6-foot man weighing in at about 200 pounds, using the device for 5 seconds or 20 seconds or something like that, not kids of 9 and 8 years old who are, 1/4 of that weight, and actually they're using it for 6 hours a day. It's absolutely staggering. And the fact that she mentioned about, the French companies who are the only people who are actually studying this in the right way, and the fact that certain districts in France are banning terminals and 5G towers and stuff within a certain circumference of schools, it's staggering that in this day and age that the stuff that she was talking about actually still happens. I couldn't, if I hadn't been in on that conversation listening to it, I wouldn't have believed it. Talking reduction in sperm count, Alzheimer's, memory loss, cancers. I mean, it's the sort of stuff that you it's very Erin Brockovich, isn't it? You know, it's very much like Hollywood nightmare film, but actually it's the reality, which is crazy to me. It's crazy.
Yeah, and what also is kind of eye-opening for me is, because I'm familiar with the lack of regulation, but what's stunning is, I realized in myself the assumptions I've made throughout my life that because something is regulated, quote unquote, that it is safe. And it's, this really illuminated that is not true. If something's regulated, learn how it's regulated, learn what that actually means, be a little more curious and a little less trusting that our best interest is being protected.
Yeah, no, just that bias is, everyone has that bias that if I can buy it in a store, it's safe. And that is just, that is nowhere near true. It is nowhere near true. And I think Dr. Davis did a really good job of helping to explain, how that applies to wireless technology in particular, and just and why it's so important, this litigation that she's engaged with against the FCC in the United States, why that is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. Because when she shared, cell phones have never been tested for safety for long-term effects. We're maybe not that abundantly aware of it now, and maybe we don't. We've got this kind of we think we'll live forever, but give it 20 or 30 years when these things have been in circulation for a good couple of decades, and then I think we'll have a real epidemic of fear on our hands about what we've been walking around in, because effectively we're walking around, the very device that enables us to live our life more easily ultimately might end up with us living our lives much more shortly based on it. And but what I loved about Dr. Davis was, get the devices off your body, and those are your children. Distance is your friend, I think she said. Lower your exposure. Yes. So again, she was not here to strike fear into the heart of the listener, but equally, I just hope that people take a little bit of information from it and go and utilize it, because we've got to stop being willing victims, because otherwise what's going to happen, it is going to be a case that in 20 years time, the Nokias, the Apples, the Huawei's and all that sort of stuff are going to be, I don't know why I said it like that, Huawei's are going to be taking them to court left, right and center. But really, we had an inkling this was happening for 20 or 30 years. Don't get upset about it now that everyone's dying off early as a species. I think we're very much at risk of being the first of our first generation to actually live a shorter life than our parents. And I think a lot of that is our own doing. We are very, very willing victims in this instance, because the information is out there if we decide to look for it.
Yeah. And, I want to lob on to that willing victim concept. Is one thing that was a through line throughout this season is the effect on children who are not willing participants. They're, so Dr. Davis was talking about, the reality and the truth that children have thinner skulls. And she's talking about fertility challenges. So there's a tangible result to, exposing children and exposing pregnant women and fertile men to EMF. And I think it's important to recognize too that, children aren't willing. We're teaching them, we're guiding them as to how to use their tech. And it's important, I think she pointed out, to make sure that kids don't have, cell phones until they're developed.
Yeah, no, just having some sanity.
Yeah, and I remember when she said that at the time, and it's really interesting. It's had the same effect on me now. When she said children have got thinner skulls, it made me run cold. It literally put a chill down my spine. And as you just said it then, Stephanie, I was like, it just makes me feel really uncomfortable, because I've got a 4-year-old and I've got a 10-month-old. And I've definitely, if the aim of the game of the podcast was to change consumer behavior with the content, then it's definitely worked on at least me, because, if my son's playing with his little iPad thing now, we put it onto, not hands-free, onto like airplane mode, so that it's not downloading everything. I keep the phone away from them, because you sort of forget. And it's really interesting. You talk about the fertility thing here, not to get too personal about it, but when my wife and I were trying for a baby the first time around, it took us about 3 years. And it's really interesting. At that time, my wife was, don't put your phone in your pocket. Where's your phone? Is your phone in your pocket? Is your phone in your pocket? And as soon as we had kids, as soon as she got what she wanted from me, then she didn't want it anymore. and honestly, the phone goes back in the pocket a lot more prior to this series. And now I'm very, very mindful of it. I'm very mindful of it now.
You know, I'm really intrigued that she knew that she was like, hey, don't put that in your pocket. Was she aware of the science, or was it just something that maybe she had heard in passing and was like desperate for children that you were not giving her?
I think a lot of people sort of maybe subconsciously know that this stuff isn't good. You know, because I see it myself. You know, when I meet people, they ask what I do, and I tell them, and like, yeah, I've always sort of thought, you know, I'm after a call, my ear is kind of warm, and it's. I always thought that wasn't quite right, and you know, so people don't want to hear this stuff, but at the same time, they already sort of know.
Therein lies the problem. You've hit the nail on the head, perfectly. I always sort of knew. Well, but you didn't do nothing about it. You always saw, you know, when you take out your phone after a day and your legs tingles a little bit. I don't know if anyone's had that experience. I'm like, oh God, that's the EMF. You know, like I say, my wife, she read blogs about fertility and stuff, and straight away they're like, you know, no hot baths, no saunas, no tight pants, get your phone out of your pocket, all that basic stuff to improve fertility. But again, like how much more is it in my pocket now that I'm not as mindful of it? And I think that's the challenge, isn't it? Is to get people to just be that little bit more mindful about it, because that whole excuse of I kind of thought that wasn't quite right, or ignorance isn't bliss, it just means you're ignorant to it. And again, there's no, you know, back in the 40, 50, 60 years ago, you'd have had to go and work very hard to find out this information. You know, it would have taken a man like your dad to write a book about this stuff, to bring it to our conscious awareness. We do not deserve to be ignorant to this now, because the information is there if we choose to look at it, but we have got to choose to look at it.
Yeah, and I think that's one key importance to this podcast, and the way that we structured it, so that, you know, you're getting the information, but you're also getting, you know, easy to do action tips that you can do today. So taking out that dauntingness, it's like you literally just have to be a little bit mindful and make a small change, you know, and that's going to help improve your health. And focusing on those little steps is, I think, how we get to a place where they just become where these actions just become part of what we do.
So I'm going to ask both of you, and I know neither of you are totally unbiased here, obviously, but when we started the season, I said, welcome to the Healthier Tech Podcast, the podcast about ways of building and maintaining a healthier relationship with technology. Do you guys think that we accomplished that goal this season?
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
But only if people go and take some form of action. You know, they used to say knowledge is power. It's not. You know, applied knowledge is power. So it's all well and good listening to it. Ironically, you're probably listening to this conversation on the very device that we are telling you to stay away from, or one of the devices. You know, you might even be, and I haven't got any of these anymore, thanks to Dr. Devra. Maybe you were listening to this on AirPods prior to listening to that episode. Maybe you've changed your behavior. But again, even still, I have to say, you know, in my ignorance, I've you know, there's been certain days I can't find my wired headphones, and I just grab the Bluetooth ones. I think, I'll be all right. I just, you know, I'll just be quick. I'll just have a quick dose of, you know, head cancer in my earlobes, potentially. Again, I've listened to the lady say it. So again, for me, the knowledge isn't enough. It's the application of the knowledge that is the difference, that will make the difference. But I definitely think we've gone some way to definitely, in a real actionable and tangible way, show people some basic steps. Because that's one of the things I've got to say, and credit to you guys, because you had a real vision for this at the beginning. And maybe I didn't get fully, not on board with it, but I didn't know how important it was going to be. You were like, we do not want to scaremonger people. We want to give it, be real simple, really tactical. We don't want to make anybody wrong. We just want to make people just a little bit more aware. And I think that all of the guests that you brought on, you know, the guest list has been beautifully curated, because no one came on and said, hey, you've got to go and lobby the government, or go to your council, or chain yourself up to a cell phone tower. It was like, you know, turn your wife off at night, be mindful about your carpet, open the windows when you're hoovering, like real basic stuff, but it could actually have a real impact on implementing, you know, a positive impact on your life. So I've got to say full credit to you guys, because I think it's been a fantastic deployment of what you guys wanted to do, which was to make a difference without scaremongering. I think it's exactly what you set out to do. I think it's a job well done, I would say.
Well, thank you. And I just want to chime in also that like I am in this world of EMF. I'm every single day, and I was illuminated on several of these, every interview really. But there were some tactical things that I was able to apply, and the nutrition side really is just not something that I realized how easy it is to add more turmeric or cumin and to like build up my resilience to EMF because I hadn't really thought about it in that way. And it, so even I found things throughout this entire season that I'm able to take action on regarding EMF and also, other aspects of health. And, Gary and Steve really helped, show some other things that I can do to help my overall health.
So what about you, Did you pick up some learnings and lessons? I assume that you did, but obviously I had tons to learn. You guys had tweaks to make.
Yeah, well, I mean, I feel like I learned quite a bit. Obviously, I was already familiar with a lot of the subject matter that we covered, but even with the people that I was very familiar with, like Dr. Deborah Davis, I think I commented during the episode itself or in the closing of the episode, life is not an emergency, and it sounds almost silly to say that stood out to me, but it was so, after the past year, it was so centering to hear that. And that's from someone that I already know very well and I'm familiar with her work. But, listening to people like Gary Brecka and Adam Cox, those both gave very different but perspectives on tech addiction and ones that I was not already familiar with. And I feel like I learned a lot. And, at this point, I'd also like to ask the listeners, what did you feel like you learned a lot this season? Did you like the people that we interviewed? Do you think that there are other subjects that we should pick for season 2 or other people we should interview for season 2? If you have that feedback, we really want to hear from you. And so we're going to ask you to please leave it in the reviews on the podcast, on whatever platform you're listening on, because that is going to help us sculpt an even better second season for you of the Healthier Tech podcast.
Absolutely. What questions do you have, based on what you've heard? We covered a lot, but of course, as you're hearing it and you're applying it to your own life, it's going to, there's potentially questions and of course your comments. We'll be reading them and logging them and using that to help us define what season 2 will be. And we really hope that you do join us for season 2. And we hope that you feel empowered leaving this, as we close out season 1.
And yeah, before signing off, James, I really want to thank you for not just for today, although your participation today was really fantastic, but for the whole season, for guiding us through this new endeavor, this new experience of podcasting, where you're a maestro. It was really invaluable to have you spearhead and be a part of this project.
Thank you very much. And honestly, there's certain podcasts that I do that I get involved in because I've done a lot now, like 150 odd probably by the time this one goes live in terms of like launches for various projects. And there's only certain ones where you're like, oh my God, I can't believe how much I got to learn. I have to admit, there was several episodes where I felt guilty that you were the client and I was the person charging the money to do the service, because I was like, I feel like I've had free mentoring from these people. I feel a little bit guilty, but I've taken a lot of notes from it. I've definitely actually changed my consumer behaviors. The phone is out of the bedroom. The laptop is off of the lap, and the carpet is going to get burnt as soon as the landlord allows me to.
You should share the interview with Steve Collette with your landlord.
Yeah, I'll do that. Actually, I'll say it wasn't my fault. Steve Collette told me to do it.
That's right. This is for humanity. Well, thank you, James. This has been a really great experience, and I'm really happy with that. We had your participation throughout the whole thing and in this episode.
And so, yeah, and to everyone else out there in podcast land, Remember that you can learn more, sign up to our mailing list, and get notified when we have a season 2 at shieldyourbody.com. That's shieldyourbody, all one word.com. And you can also just click that link in the show notes. Until next season, I'm R. Blank, and I want to thank you so much for tuning in to season 1 of the Healthier Tech Podcast. And always remember to shield your body. If you like this show and want to hear more, please remember to subscribe to this podcast, the Healthier Tech Podcast, available on all major podcasting platforms. And if you have a moment, please also leave a review. Reviews are critical to help more people find this podcast and learn about the important and undercover topics that we cover. And you can also learn more and sign up for our mailing list to get notified when we have new interviews, webinars, ebooks, and sales at shieldyourbody.com. That's shieldyourbody, all one word.com. You can also just click that link in the show notes. Until next time, I'm R. Blank, and I want to thank you so much for tuning into the Healthier Tech Podcast. And always remember to shield your body.